All right, welcome back, dear viewers. Today I am starting my deep dive into FASERIP, a classic old school system from TSR. I want to say Marvel Superheroes was published in the mid to late 80s. I was playing it in the early 90s. Um, this game, though, Heroic by Zenith Comics, is a retro clone of Marvel Superheroes, but it offers some differences that will become more apparent as we go along. I felt it best to basically address both games. My channel is using Heroic for the Row campaign that we're currently playing. Hopefully, we'll get back to it in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, I wanted to look at both of these games and just kind of highlight the differences and sort of celebrate a classic system that I had a lot of fun playing back in the day. So, be heroic. That's sort of like the mantra from the heroic game system, Zenith Comics, and I like it. And well, we'll kind of get into that as this deep dive continues. But like I said, they're essentially, I don't want to say the same game, but they are. Heroic is a clone of Marvel superheroes, and I'm going to work my way through like I did with Lamentations and some of the other deep dives, just bit by bit. This first video is really going to be about the common language and some of the nomenclature that these game systems use, so we're all on the same page and we can all know what I'm talking about when we get into character generation and combat and the powers and all that other good stuff. So what is this game about? It's about superheroes and play in, and with the Marvel game, they gave you the stats of the existing superheroes, so you could actually just play Spider-Man or the Punisher or Magneto. Well, he's a villain, so maybe you couldn't play Magneto, but you get my point. One of the recent times I played this game was a one shot in my old podcast. My buddy Brian ran a one shot, and I got to play Spider Man, and I think Gary was playing Shadowcat. I think. I can't quite remember, but it was a lot of fun. I got to play Spider Man. It was fun. But both games obviously allow you to create your own superheroes, and the rules in are kind of fun and interesting with respect to like how they capture the comic book sort of milieu genre, the whole feeling and the setting. So FASERIP, what is that? It is basically the primary stats: fighting, agility, strength, endurance, reason, intuition, and psyche. And that's just became kind of like this unofficial title of this rule set. Heroic does add an additional primary ability called dynamic. We'll get into that in a second. So, Heroic is face ripped. Could probably be some slang for getting stoned or something, I suppose. But essentially, it's the same thing. Face rip. It functions as a simple percentile dice system. You only need two D10s or a D100, I suppose, and you will roll on that and consult a chart. And there are a lot of charts. On its face, the game is pretty simplistic, in my opinion, to understand the basics, but where it gets interesting is the detail, and that's why I say deceptively crunchy. Like, you can do a lot with this game and the charts that the game provides. And what I think is really interesting is that it's flexible to cover theater of the mind play, but the game was also designed to do miniature battles. So you could pull out a city map, right, and throw down some paper minis or actual minis and beat the crap out of Magneto or try to contain the Hulk or whatever it is that you wanted to do, you know. What I think is really interesting about this game and is that the system itself is flexible to cover just about any genre of heroic storytelling. It's the reason why I started this entire series with Terminus Adventures in the Eversprawl, which is a cyber horror game. And there's no like superpowers in that. There's no Captain America in that. No, it's dark, it's gritty, there's horrific stuff going on, but the game works using this system, and I was really surprised when I ran my one shot. The row, the campaign that I'm currently putting on my channel, run by my buddy Gary, it's like this pseudo noir pre Golden Age campaign that we're going to use as the basis for future superheroes universe in our own like sort of unique setting. It's a very ambitious project. I'm hoping we see it to its completion. But if you've watched the row, if you're into actual plays, you'll see that we're playing like low level, street level heroes, and it works, and it's a lot of fun. So, as I mentioned, charts. This is the universal table from Marvel. And as you can see, there's these columns that have ranks, right? It starts with 0 to feeble to poor, typical, good, excellent, remarkable, incredible, amazing, monstrous, unearthly, and then it goes into these column shifts. Up above are the tables for specific actions that you might be taking and what happens depending on how successful your role is. We'll be getting that in a later video. But this is essentially it. You roll a D100, you consult the proper chart and determine whether you got a white, green, yellow, or red. I'm going to show you Heroic's universal table. This one looks obviously very different. It's actually flipped upside down, and you have like these column shift designators as opposed to the ranks. I'm going to get into that in another video as well, the differences. I actually like this better than Marvel Superheroes. I actually think it's a vast improvement on the game. Briefly, instead of just checking a chart that your guy is on, you're comparing. It's like an opposed roll, like excellent rank versus poor or something, and then you check the column shift. I think it's great, and he also includes a critical failure. That's what the blue is. White is a miss, green is a success, yellow is a better success, and red is a critical, right? I like how he included a critical failure. So I'll just back up so you can check the two out. Same as here, red is critical, right? But yeah, this is, you roll the die and then you check a chart and you see how successful you are, and that's really the basics of the game. Your character has essentially 3 types of abilities: primary, secondary, and special. The primary abilities are the FASERIP abilities: fighting, agility, strength, endurance, reason, intuition, psyche, and dynamic. And again, dynamic is from Heroic, not Marvel Superheroes. And it's pretty straightforward. Fighting is your combat ability. Agility is your dexterity, your ranged weapons, using it to dodge. Well, like fighting, you'll use that to block, right? Strength is your physical and power, doing physical damage when you're punching guys or like lifting cars or whatever. Endurance is personal toughness, whether you can like withstand damage and certain types of attacks. Reason is your intelligence, your ability to do all kinds of logical stuff. If you're like a tinkerer, like a Tony Stark, you're gonna have a high reason, right? Dr. Doom, my favorite villain of all time, has a very amazing. I think his reason is amazing or something like that, maybe monstrous. Intuition is common sense and wisdom. Your psyche is your mental strength. And then dynamic is your force of personality and your persuasiveness. It's kind of adds a role-playing element. So when you're like trying to persuade someone, instead of kind of guessing, there's a role you can make. I think this is a nice little addition that Zenith Comics put in for Heroic. I like it. The secondary abilities are derivative of the primary. So you have your health, and you basically add the first part of FASERIP, F-A-S-E, and that's your health. You take damage, you end up getting knocked unconscious when you're down to 0, and then there's possible death. We'll get into this more later, but this is a heroic game. This is a comic book game. This is not as gritty as something like Lamentations of the Flame Princess or Forbidden Lands or something, So death isn't necessarily guaranteed, right? What Heroic adds is a mind or mental stat which is the other half of FASERIP, and that's your mental fortitude. And what's interesting is when that reaches 0, like you can suffer some psychological stuff, effects or long-term penalties. I think that's an interesting addition, and I'll talk a little bit more at the end of this video about it. But that is not in Marvel. And then you have this stat called karma, and this is something that will fluctuate as the game progresses. But basically, you can spend karma to improve your skill rolls. So if you want to make sure you get a success, you can announce it, and then you roll, and then you add whatever karma you need to get to that success. You'll get karma for doing heroic things. You'll lose karma for doing dastardly things. And in the Marvel Supers game, karma is used to improve your abilities. So you kind of want to hold on to some of your karma. Heroic does something a little different. We'll address that in a later video in character generation and advancement. Resources is a ranked secondary ability that measures your wealth. So like if you wanted to buy something, you basically make a roll. And if you get a success, you get it. Popularity is your reputation, and that can fluctuate as well. So if you're a good guy, people are going to respond favorably, and if you're a bad guy, anti-hero, Punisher type, they're not going to respond as favorably. Heroic calls it renown, but it's essentially the same thing. And now the special abilities. There's 2 types. There's powers, and then there's talents. I'll address talents first, actually. Talents are like skills. Think of it like that. Your character's good at martial arts, let's say, and that might give you a +1 column shift to your fighting ability. So if your fighting is excellent, and you're going to use your martial arts to knock someone down, you would column shift it to remarkable, the next one up, because you're using your skill. Whereas someone who just has no special talent in fighting would just use their excellent or whatever their rank is, right? Dr. Alchemy, my character in the row, has genetics. So whenever I'm tinkering with genetics, my reason or whatever roll will be increased by 1. And I'm looking forward to messing with people's genetics in that game. But that's talents, and they're pretty straightforward. Now, powers, this is the cool stuff that your character can do. And the Marvel Superheroes game has just this exhaustive list of all kinds of stuff. It's so exhaustive, I can't do it in one video. I'm going to do a completely separate video dedicated to powers and how they work. But they're kind of tied to the character's origin, which we'll cover in the character generation video. But it is exhaustive. There's just about everything from turning into a flaming torch, right, the Human Torch, to magic, to psychic abilities, to mutations, all kinds of stuff. If you watch my Terminus video, the powers is what you build your phageware and phage spellcasting stuff from. So instead of having the ability to burst into flames through some sort of mutation or altered human state or being robotic, you're casting a spell, or you have this weird biomechanical thing grafted onto you and allows you to burst into flames. But that's how this thing translates to different genres. I wanted to highlight this powers the heroic way. So when you get to the power section in character generation in Marvel Superheroes, it starts giving you the list, and then you go to the appropriate page to look up that power, right? Zenith Comics put the powers in an appendix way at the end of the PDF/book, okay? And it starts out with a paragraph about you talking to your GM about what you want your character to do. And I think that's just awesome. I think that is so much more fun, and it opens up creativity for your character. Because one of the things I had, one of my problems with Marvel Superheroes back in the day was every time I rolled up a guy, I was like, oh, this is kind of like the Human Torch. This is kind of like Mr. Fantastic. This is kind of like the Hulk. This is kind of like Spider-Man, and so on and so forth. And I really never felt like my superhero was special in any way, shape, or form. Now, granted, I could come up with my own stuff back then too, but so sue me, I was a preteen. But what I like about what Heroic is doing, it's flat out telling you, ignore everything and just come up with your own thing. But you do have the appendix to look at to give you some ideas and how to adjudicate how the character will play without those powers you came up with. So using my character, Dr. Alchemy, I wanted to play a tech guy like Tony Stark, but I didn't want to be in a super suit, right? So we talked about how my character can improve his combat abilities, improve his physical abilities through the use of these like special genetic chemical mixtures that he's come up with, and he'll just inject himself. And it's got some drawbacks, and because of the drawbacks, it actually improved the power level a bit. But I now have like this really unique character, and I really like him. I don't feel like I'm copying anybody. I'm not in the shadow of anybody. Like, this is my character, and I really like that. Certainly, at the back of the Heroic book, there is a chart for randomly generating your characters, and you can do that. That's totally up to you. But I think encouraging players to just come up with their own thing and having a conversation with a game master, I think, or what they call the judge in this game, is just spot on and the right direction to go, in all honesty. So you heard me talk a little bit about ranks, and you saw the chart. What a feat is when you make a roll, okay? And that's because you need to determine what happens, and primary abilities will have ranks, some of your secondary abilities will have ranks, and your powers will have ranks. So when you have to make a feat roll, that's when you're checking the chart, okay? I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in later videos, but that roll can be affected by the intensity of the situation and precisely what you're doing, so it becomes like sort of like this comparison thing. But ultimately, that's it. You have to make a feat. You're doing some kind of feat, and you've determined which primary or secondary ability or power is appropriate, and then you consult the chart. And like I said earlier, Heroic and Marvel sort of do feats a little differently. They're similar, but in some instances they're expressly different, and that's based all on the differences between the two universal tables. You can probably guess I'm siding with Heroic on this one, but we'll talk about that when we get to combat and powers and feats in the later video. So before we wrap it up, I wanted to mention some further thoughts just on what I've seen so far with what we've been playing, what I've been reading. The differences between the two games are going to become more apparent as we get into the nitty-gritty of it all. But Heroic really feels to me to be more focused on story and character development, whereas Marvel was about sort of like emulating that comic book experience and trying to and doing the cool stuff that your favorite heroes can do. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. But you know, if you follow the Gen X GM on his YouTube channel, you know that he's kind of a story guy. Like, he likes good, compelling stories. And so this game, this retro clone, is really starting to emulate that, is really starting to do that, and I think it's successful. Like I said, I really like my character, and I like what I can do with him, and I love the fact that I got to make him. I didn't have to rely on some chart to do it. So that is what we're going to see as we move through this entire series. So I do have a bit of a bias here, as you could probably tell. I am a big supporter of indie creators, and you can get the classic TSR Marvel game at classicmarvelforever.com. I think it's a free download, I think. But here, like I said, Heroic is a retro clone that's in beta test right now, and you can get that at DriveThruRPG and play it yourself. I think there's some great stuff in it. I think it's improving the game from the original. And what I did was I contributed $1. I downloaded it. I read it, started playing it, really liked it, so I went back and I contributed more. I encourage you to do the same, but don't do it yet. Why don't you watch these videos and see what you think? Okay, but I am a big fan of heroic, and I hope you become one too. So, next video will be on character creation. Stick with me, and yeah, I'll see you around.